Buy on MTG. Construct your deck. Command your board. Conquer the table.
Yeah, I'm Seth. I'm playing Cleopatra. I'm going to be playing legendaries and killing them and killing them.
Killing them and killing them?
Killing them, killing them.
Reasonable.
I am Jason, and I'm playing Izzet Spellslinger with Malik Reforged Researcher.
Reasonable. My name's Rob. Playing Chatterfang, so it's just regular squirrel stuff with aristocrats something.
I'm James. I'm playing Ghired, Mirror of the Wilds. I'm going to make as many tokens as I can and hopefully kick the shit out of these people.
All right.
You're welcome.
James opens up with a cavalry courtyard, gaining a life and getting a tapped plains. Seth plays a tapped woodland cemetery and passes turn. Jason plays a snow-covered island, passes turn. Robert top decks a Terramorphic Expanse, so he cracks it for a forest and passes turn. James plays a commercial district, tapped, and surveils, keeps it on top. Passes turn. Seth plays an untapped forest, taps for 2, plays Mesmeric Orb. The table sighs because they know what it did last game. Jason plays an untapped snow-covered mountain and passes turn. Rob untaps Milling 1 from the Mesmeric Orb, plays a land, taps for 2, and exiles the Mesmeric Orb with a Tear Asunder because he doesn't want a repeat of the previous game. James untaps, plays a Command Tower for turn, and taps for 2, playing a Suture Priest. James passes the turn. Seth untaps, draws for turn, plays a Pathway, taps for 3, and plays a Black Market Connection. Jason untaps, draws, plays an island, taps for 3, playing a Cursed Mirror as a copy of Suture Priest. Suture Priest triggers, Jason losing 1. Jason offers the trade by swinging at James. James declines. Pass turn. Rob untaps, draws for turn, plays a forest, taps for 3, 2 of it being green for one of his favorite treasure hate cards, Viridian Revel. Passing the turn to James, he untaps, draws for turn, he plays an Urza Saga as his land, putting the lore counter on it. Taps for 2, 1 being white, playing Staff of the Storyteller, which will trigger and make a spirit, triggering Suture Priest, and also triggering Staff of the Storyteller. James moves to combat and decides to choose violence and attacks Rob for 1. James passes the turn to Seth. Seth untaps and on upkeep triggers Black Market Connection, paying 3 life for a treasure and an additional card. Draws for turn. Seth taps for 2, casting Nature's Lore, finding a forest untapped onto the battlefield. Seth taps for 3, casting Feign the Broker, triggering Suture Priest, and James elects to have Seth lose a life. Passing the turn to Jason, Jason untaps, draws, and taps for 4, playing a Stormkiln Artist. Jason passes the turn to Rob. Rob untaps, draws, plays a land, taps for 2, casting Golgari Signet, activating Golgari Signet, an additional land, and plays Chatterfang, his commander, for the first time this game. Chatterfang triggers Suture Priest and reminds Jason that he didn't lose a life when Stormkiln Artist enters the battlefield, so Rob and Jason both lose a life due to Suture Priest. Rob passes the turn to James. James untaps, upkeep, draws, adds a lore counter to Urza Saga, activating it to make a Construct, triggering Suture Priest, triggering Staff of the Storyteller. James plays a Reliquary Tower for turn. James passes the turn to Seth. Seth is going to untap, upkeep, and draw, triggering Black Market Connection on his upkeep. Seth is going to pay 3 life with Black Market Connection to make a treasure and draw an additional card. Seth plays a tapped Snarl with no ability to reveal to keep it untapped. Seth taps for 3, playing Nikara, Lair Scavenger. Suture Priest triggers, James having Seth lose 1 life. Seth then pays 4 by sacrificing 2 treasures to cast Cleopatra Exalted Exile, triggering Robert's Viridian Revel twice. Triggering Suture Priest, James having Seth lose 1 life. Seth moves to his end step, triggering Cleopatra, enabling him to put +1 counters on his other 2 legendary creatures. Passing the turn to Jason, Jason untap, upkeep, draws for turn, taps for 4, casting Unexpected Windfall, triggering Stormkiln Artist to make a treasure. Jason discards a big score as the additional casting cost for Unexpected Windfall, allowing him to draw 2 cards and make 2 treasures. Jason moves to combat, swinging the Stormkiln Artist at Rob for 6 damage. Rob elects to not block to maintain his commander. Jason passes the turn to Rob. Rob untaps, upkeep, and draws for turn. Rob activates Golgari's Signet, paying a total of 5 to play a Revel in Riches. Regardless of the additional land draw from Viridian Revel, Rob still misses his land drop. Passing the turn to James, James untap, upkeep, draws for turn. 3rd lore counter on the stack for the Urza Saga. He activates it to make a construct, then adding 3rd lore counter, sacrificing Urza Saga to find a soul ring. Creature entering the battlefield under James's control triggers Suture Priest as well as the Staff of the Storyteller. James then moves to combat, swinging the Spirit at Jason for 1 in the air. And then he pees the tea. Seth untaps, moving to his upkeep, triggering Black Market Connections. He's going to pay 3 life to draw an additional card and make a treasure. Then he draws for turn. Seth happens to top deck one of his favorite cards, so he taps for 6 and plays Lurking Predators. Robert, just reading this card for the first time, thinks it would be amazing in his Bellow Bard of the Brambles deck, so quickly jumps onto TCG Player and orders one. Seth moves to his end steps, triggering Cleopatra, adding 2 more +1 counters, and passing the turn to Jason. Jason untaps and draws for turn, and you can see he put Sadness on the stack as he's looking at potentially missing yet another land drop. Jason taps for 5, sacrificing a treasure, putting 3 triggers on the stack. Robert to draw a card, Suture Priest to force him to lose a life as he's casting his commander, as well as Seth to reveal off Lurking Predators, revealing Eladamri. Eladamri triggering Suture Priest as well, causing him to lose a life. Jason sacrifices an additional treasure for a blue, cost reduced by 3 due to his commander to cast a Vile Duplication. Treasure sacrifice triggering Viridian Revel. Cast triggering both Stormkiln Artist as well as Lurking Predators. Creature entering the battlefield, triggering Suture Priest. Seth revealing Aveline de Grandpré off of Lurking Predators, triggering Suture Priest. Passing the turn to Rob, Rob untaps, upkeep, draws, plays Swarmyard for turn. Rob activates Golgari's Signet, tapping for a total of 3, putting Toxic Deluge on the stack, and then goes into the tank, trying to do math in efforts to wipe the board, and taking into consideration that Jason's commander and the copy can both get larger if he casts spells. After some quick goat math, Rob elects to Toxic Deluge for 10, triggering Lurking Predators, in which Seth reveals Alanis Morissette, triggering Suture Priest. In response to the board wipe, James pays 3 and convokes to pay for Clever Concealment to phase out his non-land permanents, triggering Lurking Predators. Seth reveals a Golden Throne off of Lurking Predators and elects to keep it on top. Jason sacrifices 2 treasures to cast Magma Opus, triggering Viridian Revel twice, assigning 3 damage to Chatterfang and 1 to Suture Priest. Jason elects to target Rob's 2 untapped lands, Swarmyard and Forest, with Magma Opus. With targeting on the stack, Rob activates Swarmyard to put a regeneration shield on Chatterfang just in case the Toxic Deluge gets countered. As we assign damage and resolve Magma Opus, Jason makes a token, triggering Suture Priest. Rob taps his Forest. They assign all damage dealt by the spell. Jason's going to draw 2 cards. Lurking Predator triggers. Seth elects to keep the same card on top. Stormkiln Artist triggers, making Jason a treasure. Revel in Riches triggers after Suture Priest dies, making Rob a treasure. No additional responses, so James' Clever Concealment resolves. With Deluge still on the stack, Seth activates Feign, Broker of Blood, sacrificing Alanis Morissette to put 2 counters on Eladamri. The sacrifice triggers Revel in Riches, so Rob makes a treasure. Rob remembers the damage assigned to Chatterfang from Magma Opus, so he taps Chatterfang and removes the regeneration shield. Seth has 6 triggers on the stack from Cleopatra. First off, to draw 6 cards, additionally losing 6 life. Nakara sees 2 other creatures with counters on it die, so he will draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. Seth had 5 creatures go to the graveyard, triggering Rob's Revelant Riches 5 times. Jason had 4 creatures go to the graveyard, triggering Rob's Revelant Riches 4 times. Rob's commander dies, returning it back to the command zone. The table acknowledges that Rob has enough treasures for Revelant Riches if it gets the whole way back around to him, so Rob elects to start using said treasures. Sacrificing 2 and tapping 1 more for a Bloodroot Apothecary. Giving himself 1 treasure and giving Jason the other treasure because he's missed so many land drops. Triggering Lurking Predators, Seth is going to bottom a forest. Rob sacrifices 5 more treasures to recast Chatterfang, triggering Lurking Predators. Seth reveals a Kolvari God of Kinship, putting it onto the battlefield. Rob sacrifices 2 treasures to cast Blood Artist, triggering Lurking Predators yet again. Revealing a land, Seth bottoms the land. Rob moves to cleanup, verifies he's at 7 cards, passes the turn. James phases in, untaps, draws a card. James taps for 3, casting his commander for the first time. Robert predicts that it's going to be a land off of the Lurking Predators trigger, and I'll be damned. At that point, James passes the turn. Seth untaps. On his upkeep, he pays 1 life to Black Market Connections, making a treasure, and draws for turn. Seth plays his land for turn, tapping 5 for Sir Conrad. Seth taps for 4, sacrificing 2 treasures, putting 2 Revelant Riches triggers on the stack, as well as 2 Rootbound Apothecary triggers. Seth plays a Great Henge. Seth taps the Great Henge, gaining 2 life to play a Delighted Halfling, putting 2 triggers on the stack, a +1 counter, and drawing a card. Seth moves to clean up and discards down to 7. Seth discards 3 lands and an Arcane Signet. Passing the turn to Jason, untap, upkeep, draw for turn. Fingers crossed it's a land. Unfortunately, it was not, so he moves to clean up, discarding a Fire and Ice and a Champion's Helm. Passing the turn to Rob, untap, upkeep, draw for turn. Rob plays Llanowar Waste, taps it for colorless, activating Golgari Signet, taps for a total of 6 to cast a Liliana Dreadhorde General. Lurking Predators trigger, Seth reveals Talisman, putting it on the bottom. In response, Jason taps for 5, one of which being a treasure, triggering Rootbound Apothecary, giving Jason 2 poison counters, and drawing Rob 1 card off of Viridian Revel. Casting Spell Swindle, targeting Liliana Dreadhorde General, triggering Lurking Predators, Seth revealed a Gyric's Uprising, bottoming the card. Jason counters the Liliana, Spell Swindle, making him 6 treasures. Rob sacrifices 1 treasure to cast Disciple of the Vault, triggering Lurking Predators, Seth revealing Skullbriar, putting it onto the battlefield. Rob moves to combat, swings Chatterfang, forest walking at James for 3 commander damage. Rob moves to end step and clean up, discarding a Baron more to hand size, passing the turn to James. James untap, upkeep, draw, taps for 2 with the Soul Ring, casting a Gruul Signet, triggering Lurking Predators yet again. Revealing a land, Seth putting it on the bottom. James activates Staff of the Storyteller to draw a card. James elects to P the T. Seth untaps during his upkeep. He pays 1 life to make a Black Market Connection treasure, draws for turn. Seth taps for 5 for a Doubling Season. Seth taps for 1 to play a Birds of Paradise, triggering the Great Henge to put a +1 counter, doubled by Doubling Season, and draw a card. Seth taps for 4, gaining 2 life off of the Great Henge to cast a Yavin Nature's Herald, triggering Great Henge, putting a +1 counter on it, doubled by Doubling Season, and drawing a card again. Seth moves through combat and passes the turn to Jason. Jason untaps and draws for turn. We all pray to the magic gods for a land, and they said no thank you. Unfortunately, Jason has no actions and passes the turn to Rob. Rob untaps and draws for turn, plays the land, taps through Golgari Signet, playing a Toski Bearer of Secrets, triggering Lurking Predators. Seth reveals Belladros Witherbloom, triggering Great Henge, adding a +1 counter, doubled by Doubling Season, and drawing a card. Rob moves to combat, swinging Chatterfang at Seth for a 3/3 Forest Walk commander damage. On Rob's end step, Jason taps for 5, sacrificing a treasure to cast Evacuation. Treasure sacrifice triggers Disciple of the Vault. Rob elects to have 1 damage dealt to Seth and draw a card off of Viridian Revel. Triggering Seth's Lurking Predators, where he reveals Grey Merchant of Asphodel, triggering Great Henge, putting a +1 counter on it, doubled by Doubling Season, and drawing a card. Ghired trigger on the stack. Devotion is 6, so we each lose 6, and Seth gains 18. Seth then pays 10 life with Belladros effect to untap all of his lands. Evacuation resolves, returning all creatures to their owner's hand. Still in Rob's end step, he moves to clean up and has to discard 5 cards to hand size. Passing the turn to James, untap, upkeep, draw, taps for 2 with the Soul Ring, casting Arcane Signet, triggering Lurking Predators. Seth putting the card on the bottom. James taps for 6 to cast Ohir Talk, Deepest Foundation. Triggering Seth Lurking Predators, revealing Slurk All Ingesting, which would enter with 5 +1 counters, +1 from Great Henge, doubled by Doubling Season, for a total of 12 +1 counters, and drawing him a card. On James's end step, Seth taps for 4, flashing in Yvonne, Nature's Herald, triggering Great Henge, putting a +1 counter on it, doubled by Doubling Season, and drawing a card. Seth then taps for 1 to flash in a Birds of Paradise, triggering Great Henge to put a +1 counter, doubled by Doubling Season, drawing a card. Then tapping for 2, flashing in Skullbriar, triggering Great Henge again for a +1 counter, doubled by Doubling Season, and drawing a card. He then sacrifices a treasure, triggering Viridian Rebel. Rob draws a card, flashes in Delighted Halfling, triggering the Great Henge to put a +1 counter, doubled by Doubling Season, and drawing a card yet again. Seth now complete with all of his action during James's end step. The turn passes to Seth. Untap during his upkeep. He pays 1 life to Black Market Connections to make a treasure and draws a card. Seth plays a Fabled Passage as his land for turn, sacrifices it, finding a forest. Seth taps for 7, gaining 2 life from the Great Henge to summon an uncounterable due to the Delighted Halfling, Belladros Witherbloom, triggering the Great Henge, putting a +1 counter on it, doubling it by Doubling Season, and drawing a card. Seth then taps for 3 to summon a Yaheni Undying Partisan, triggering the Great Henge, putting a +1 counter, doubled by Doubling Season, and drawing a card. Seth plays a Yavimaya Cradle of Growth for his land for turn, making everything forests. Seth then pays 1 for a Llanowar Elves, triggering the Great Henge and doing the rigmarole of 2 +1 counters and a card. Seth pays 3, sacrificing a treasure. Rob forgets his Viridian Revel trigger. He casts Harrow, sacrificing a swamp, getting 2 basics. Seth taps for 2 to play an Endorial Narsil Reforged. Seth then pays 10 life, using Belladros' ability to untap all of his lands. Seth then pays 5 to summon a Sir Conrad, triggering Great Henge, Doubling Season, draw a card. Seth pays 5 for a Grey Merchant of Asphodel, triggering the Great Henge. With Gary on the stack, Rob taps for 3, targeting Belladros Witherbloom with a Putrefy. In response, Seth sacrifices Belladros to Yaheni, triggering Rob's Revel in Riches, giving him a treasure. Slurk sees Belladros die, so it triggers to put a +1 counter on all of his creatures that have counters. So we add 1 to everything, missing the trigger from Doubling Season. Gary finally resolves. Devotion is 7, so we each lose 7, and Seth gains 21, putting him to 35 life. Gary enters with 2 +1 counters from Great Henge and Doubling Season, and he draws a card. Seth moves to combat, sending 2 creatures at Rob and 2 creatures at Jason for a total of 9 damage at Rob for Xaxes and 20 damage at Jason for Xaxes. In response, Jason sacrifices 4 treasures to cast Drown in Dreams, triggering Viridian Revel 4 times as we dig for an answer. This triggers Lurking Predators for Seth. Seth reveals a land off of Lurking Predators. Rob didn't find an answer from his Viridian draws, and Jason finally drew a land, LOL. Priority passes around the table. Nobody has any answers. Rob takes 9, killing him. Jason takes 20, killing him, knocking them out of the game. Post-combat phase, Seth moves to clean up, discarding to hand size, discarding 6 creatures, triggering Sir Conrad 6 times, causing James to lose an additional 6. Passing the turn to James, James untap, upkeep, and draws for turn. James plays his land for turn, gaining him life and tutoring a basic. James finds a mountain. James activates Staff of the Storyteller, drawing a card, digging for an answer. James taps for 7, X equaling 5 to awaken the woods, making 5 forest dryads, being tripled by Ojertak. James is going to make 15 forest dryads. Seth triggers lurking predators yet again. Seth reveals Drivnaj Carnage Dominus off of lurking predators, triggering the Great Henge, doubled by doubling season to 2+1 counters and draw a card. James is done with his turn, so he's going to pass to Seth. Rob wanted to see the Drivnad. When we put it back onto Seth's board state, we forgot to put the +1 counters on it. Seth untapped. During his upkeep, he forgets his black market connection and draws for turn. Seth gives a quick count of historics in his graveyard. He has 10, so he's able to cast the Capuline Triad for free, triggering the Great Henge and doubling season for 2+1 counters and draw a card. Additionally, on ETB, Seth exiles 30 mana value worth of creatures to get an emblem where creatures he controls have base power and toughness of 9/9. Seth then casts Nissa Ascended Animus, doubling the amount of counters on it from doubling season. Seth then uses the -7 on Nissa to give all of his creatures until end of turn +1/+1 for each forest he controls and trample. James can see the writing on the wall and concedes the game to Seth, making Seth the winner.
Hello, everybody. It's Rob. Learned a lot from my first Commander game edit/review. Came up with a couple different methods that I was testing out in efforts to try and make a seamless commentary in conjunction with the gameplay and not make the gameplay too choppy. Final answer, I ended on just speeding up the subsections of the gameplay to try and correlate it with the narration as close as possible. I do hope that you enjoyed it, and I will definitely be open to any additional comments or constructive criticisms that I could make it better. Overall, it was a lot of fun and a little bit different than I had initially thought, and took a little bit longer than I initially thought, and that's probably because I changed how I was doing it 3 times. So this game was actually recorded on Wednesday night, and here we are on Sunday. I did have a couple real life things that popped up, but overall, getting the first game out there, and hope you all enjoyed it. And as always, this has been Bion MTG. I'm Rob. Good luck and have fun.